My packages were sizzling. Not metaphorically. Actually sizzling. As in, tiny trails of smoke curling up from the seams of a thick cardboard crate left on my porch, bubbling in the afternoon sun, soaked in some kind of corrosive liquid that reeked like a high school chemistry lab meltdown. I stood there, grocery bag still in hand, blinking at the horror show in front of me. There was no note, no explanation, just the acrid stench of bleach and destruction. And the worst part? That package was not some Amazon order of socks or kitchen gadget. It was a priceless artifact from a private collector in Italy, on loan to me for authentication. An artifact insured for over $2 million. And now it looked like a soggy, white-foamed crime scene. I live in a neighborhood that looks like it was pulled from a catalog titled Peaceful Suburbia. Trimmed hedges. Identical mailboxes. A newsletter that arrives precisely at 7:30 every Monday morning, with HOA-approved font and passive-aggressive reminders about lawn height. It's the kind of place that prides itself on uniformity and silence. But don't let the quiet fool you. It's run like a dictatorship, and the tyrant's name is Karen Millbrook. Karen is the HOA president. Short, sharp, and absolutely humorless, she walks the neighborhood like a self-appointed sheriff. Her clipboard might as well be a badge. She has ticketed flower pots for being visually disruptive, and once tried to fine a neighbor $200 for hanging a Halloween skeleton before October. I'd always kept my distance, content to wave politely and avoid eye contact. I didn't want a war. I just wanted peace. But today, peace was the one thing I wouldn't get. Backing up a bit, I should explain who I am and why that package mattered. My name is Adam Rhodes. I'm an independent museum consultant and artifact authenticator. Most of my work involves examining ancient relics for universities, museums, or private collectors. I work from home most of the year, and my house also doubles as my lab. My late wife, Elena, was also in the field. We built our careers and reputations together. After she passed away 2 years ago, I stepped back from the bigger projects. But when I got an email last month from an Italian collector offering me a chance to evaluate an unclassified Etruscan idol, I said yes. Partly for the work. Mostly for her. The package had been shipped in a climate-controlled container with full insurance and custom cushioning, all per international standard. I had set up a temporary receiving zone just inside the front foyer and even coordinated with the courier service for a specific drop window. I left a sign on the door with a request. Package contains fragile artifact. Please do not move. It was all carefully planned. And now it was a disaster. I dropped the grocery bags inside and rushed to pull up the porch camera footage. The package had arrived that morning, right on schedule. The courier scanned it, gently placed it down, and took a photo. A few hours later, there she was. Karen Millbrook, strutting into the frame like she owned the universe, wearing her neon HOA windbreaker and surgical glove. She looked at the package, glanced around, and pulled out a jug of bleach from a tote bag. Without hesitation, she started dousing the box. Slow. Methodical. Then she pulled out her phone, snapped a picture, and walked away like she had just saved the community from a bomb. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was surreal. My mind reeled. Why would she do this? What gave her the right? More importantly, what exactly did she think she was achieving? Before I could form a plan, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Marcus, my next-door neighbor, standing with a confused look and holding a half-burned electrical outlet cover in his hand. Hey Adam. Did you by any chance have a power surge or something today? My home office lights went crazy, and my outlet just melted. I stared at the warped plastic in his hand. Wait, seriously? When? About 20 minutes ago. Whole house flickered. My wife screamed because the toaster shot out sparks. Weirdest thing. That made no sense. I hadn't run anything unusual. The artifact crate didn't have power. It was just insulated. But then I remembered that Karen had sprayed it while it sat next to my smart delivery port. A port directly wired into the front-facing monitoring grid, which included weatherproof outlets, a smart lockbox, and the RFID signal booster. If bleach got into the panel, I rushed outside and checked the utility box beside the front step. It was scorched. Tiny black marks spidered out across the paint, and one of the outlet caps had half melted. That explained the flickering. Karen's bleach dump had triggered a short circuit that fried the shared residential transformer line, which meant other homes were likely affected too. Back inside, I yanked my phone and called the HOA emergency line. Predictably, it went to voicemail, with Karen's voice chirping, "Please leave a message for your neighborhood council. All violations must be submitted in writing." I didn't leave a message. Instead, I called the courier company. They confirmed delivery. I called the artifact insurance agent. He groaned audibly when I told him bleach had dissolved the shipment. Then he asked if I had footage. I said yes. Then came the million-dollar question, actually, more like 2 million. "Do you know who did it?" "Oh, I know exactly who did it," I said, eyes locked on the paused footage of Karen dumping her bleach bottle like a villain in a cartoon. After that call, I sent a copy of the video to my lawyer, Riley Tran. She had handled Elena's estate and had been my go-to legal brain ever since. Within minutes, she texted me one word: war. But even as I began gathering the evidence, I had to keep fielding knocks from neighbors complaining about power issues. Apparently, the electrical short had triggered surges in at least 5 homes, including one that tripped an elderly resident's medical alert system. It was only a matter of time before the whole neighborhood knew something had gone terribly wrong. And I had a feeling Karen would try to spin it her way. The final twist that day came when I checked my mailbox. Inside, among the usual HOA newsletters and local coupons, was a bright pink violation slip with Karen's scrawl: "Unapproved package left in visible location. Immediate fine pending. HOA Code 14B. I laughed, loud and bitter. Then I crumpled the note, looked back at my smoke-touched front porch, and muttered, "You really picked the wrong artifact to mess with, Karen." What she didn't know yet was that not only had she destroyed an irreplaceable historical object, but the collector behind it was one of Europe's most ruthless legal pursuers of antiquity damage. And the trail was already leading straight back to her bleach-stained hands. By sunrise the next morning, my mailbox looked like it had entered a passive-aggressive relationship with the HOA. For more notices, each in progressively bolder colors, all warning me about violations ranging from excessive porch debris to unauthorized tampering with community utilities. The last one, written in Karen's signature blue gel pen, accused me of malicious sabotage of shared infrastructure. That's right. In her mind, I had sabotaged my own front step to cover up an illegal delivery. She even underlined illegal 3 times, just for drama. I was almost impressed by the audacity, almost. Meanwhile, the electrical issue had grown into a full-blown mystery. The neighborhood group chat was in flames. People were comparing notes. Flickering lights, strange zapping noises, microwave resets, and one poor soul whose electric garage door had slammed shut mid-exit, trapping him half in, half out. Naturally, Karen was already messaging the group chat, spinning her story. She claimed an improperly shielded foreign device had caused a surge and that someone in violation of HOA import rules may have endangered the entire block. That someone, of course, was me. And that foreign device was the scorched remains of a 2,000-year-old idol now fused with bleach and despair. I walked to the corner store that morning, needing air and caffeine, and found a small crowd gathered near the HOA bulletin board. Someone had taped up a blurry frame from the surveillance footage I'd leaked. Karen mid-spray, bleach bottle in hand, caught in high-definition villainy. Underneath, someone had written, "Bleach Bandit strikes again." I turned to find Marcus, my neighbor with the toasted outlet, already sipping his coffee with a smirk. "You're a celebrity now," he said. "Half the neighborhood's rooting for you. The other half's terrified they'll be next." "Karen knows no mercy," I muttered. "Speaking of which," he added, lowering his voice. "Did you hear what happened at Jenna's place?" I hadn't. Jenna lived 2 doors down and mostly kept to herself. Marcus leaned in. She had a solar battery system installed last month. Karen's been on her case about the unsanctioned panel placement. But here's the kicker, Jenna's system shorted last night. Fried the whole inverter. Electrician says it looks like a surge hit her smart grid from the outside. My stomach dropped. That was the same time my outlet melted. Did she get a violation notice too? 3 of them. And a handwritten note about abuse of off-grid power systems endangering community stability. Marcus looked both concerned and amused. Sound familiar? It was becoming clear this wasn't just a rogue bleach incident. Karen's vendetta went deeper than I'd realized. She wasn't just micromanaging landscaping and mailbox paint, she was waging war against anything she didn't personally approve of, and she was using HOA power as her weapon. That, or she truly believed she was the last line of defense against suburban collapse. When I returned home, I found 2 things waiting: a knock on the door from an insurance adjuster named Howard, and a suspicious email from Karen marked urgent. HOA community security breach. I let Howard in first. Howard was a thin man with a coffee thermos, beige slacks, and the air of someone who'd seen one too many accidental bonfires. He reviewed the footage, examined the package remains, and took notes like he was cataloging a war crime. When he saw the outlet panel damage, he sighed so deeply I thought he'd never stop exhaling. "Mr. Rhodes, I need to be clear. This artifact was listed at $2.3 million in the insurance documents." "Yes. And its value was verified by both the Rome Antiquities Commission and the Metropolitan Museum?" "Yes." "And the package was labeled insured and sealed?" "Yes." "Then this is catastrophic." He was right. It was. But it still hadn't sunk in until he laid it out like that. Karen hadn't just destroyed a box. She had torched a one-of-a-kind relic, insulted an international collector, and potentially implicated the entire HOA in the process. If that wasn't enough, the power surges she'd indirectly caused were beginning to look like a civil liability storm just waiting to explode. "Do you have counsel?" Howard asked. "Yes. Riley Tran. She's already building a case." He nodded grimly. "Good. Because this is going to court." After he left, I opened Karen's email. The subject line screamed urgency, but the content was pure paranoia. She was organizing a safety patrol and asking residents to report suspicious imports, unregulated electronic systems, and devices of unknown origin. She included a list of potential threats, most of which were just descriptions of my job. And at the bottom, in bright red font, "If you see something, bleach something." That was it. I couldn't let this spiral further. I forwarded the email to Riley, along with the footage and a summary of all the complaints from neighbors. She replied within minutes. "Time to escalate. Meet tomorrow." The next day at Riley's office, we went through every detail. Riley was calm, methodical, and precise. Her walls were lined with casebooks and awards, and her desk had a single succulent that somehow looked intimidating. She tapped her pen against a notepad and said, "We're not just going after property destruction. We're going for libel, negligence, and possibly even violation of federal artifact transport protections." I raised an eyebrow. "Federal?" She nodded. "If we can prove Karen's actions disrupted a protected international loan, there are bigger laws in play. Plus, with the electrical damage, there's your neighborhood class action." It was surreal hearing it put in those terms. I'd gone from unboxing a historical treasure to preparing for a multi-branch legal strike against the bleach-happy tyrant of Whispering Pines. But Riley wasn't done. "Also," she said, flipping open her laptop, "you're not the only one she's hit. I found 3 cases from the last year where she tampered with deliveries, citing HOA authority. One was a neighbor's insulin shipment she claimed was improperly stored. The guy nearly went into diabetic shock." "She did what?" Exactly. We're going to subpoena the HOA board minute. If they gave her that authority, they're partially liable. If they didn't, she acted alone and she's finished. The plan was set. But what none of us expected came that evening. Karen showed up at my door. She wasn't alone. She had 2 HOA board members behind her, both looking like they'd been dragged along reluctantly. Karen, ever the performance artist, was dressed in her official HOA president windbreaker and holding a clipboard, even though she was standing on my welcome mat. "We need to speak," she said. About the dangerous package you attempted to smuggle into our community. I've already filed a formal HOA grievance, but I'd like to resolve this amicably." I blinked. "You bleached a historical artifact worth millions, and nearly electrocuted 3 people. She stiffened. "That's one version of events. But I've already notified the neighborhood of the security breach, and if you refuse to cooperate, I may be forced to issue a cease and desist." It took everything in me not to laugh. But I didn't have to. Because behind her, one of the board members whispered just loud enough, "You sprayed bleach on a priceless statue, Karen." Her face flushed. She spun on him. "It was unidentified. Could have been a bomb. It had a customs seal and international declaration sticker," he replied. She turned back to me with a forced smile. "This can still be settled quietly." "Oh, it will be," I said, stepping back and letting the storm door swing shut in her face. "Just not the way you think." Behind the glass, I could see the second board member mouthing, "We're so sorry." Karen didn't notice. She was too busy furiously scribbling something on her clipboard. By that point, it wasn't about a package anymore. It was about power. Karen's grip on the neighborhood was beginning to slip, and I had just given it the push it needed. Tomorrow, the lawsuit would be filed. And that clipboard? It wouldn't save her from what was coming next. 3 days after filing the lawsuit, the neighborhood looked like it was preparing for war. Not a loud, chaotic one, but the kind with whisper campaigns, curt waves, and surveillance cameras pointed suspiciously at everyone's front porch. Flags of loyalty were raised in the form of lawn ornaments. Those who supported me had plastic flamingos, those who backed Karen had blue garden globes, and the few who dared to stay neutral went decoration-free, as though Switzerland had taken root in the cul-de-sac. The lawsuit hit like a thunderclap. Riley's firm filed a meticulously documented complaint naming both Karen and the Whispering Pines HOA as defendant. The charges included intentional destruction of property, libel, gross negligence, and a particularly spicy accusation: reckless endangerment of critical infrastructure. Karen had not only doused a $2 million artifact in bleach, but the resulting surge had nearly fried an elderly neighbor's CPAP machine, knocked out power to half a dozen homes, and apparently set off an electrical fault in the HOA clubhouse server room. The backup generator had sparked and died. Ironically, the neighborhood's digital gate logs were now permanently offline, meaning no one knew who had entered or exited for a 48-hour window. Chaos in spreadsheet form. I was in my kitchen trying to microwave leftover Thai food when the lights flickered again. The microwave beeped, let out a confused buzz, and then shut down entirely. Seconds later, a dull thud sounded from outside, followed by shouting. I stepped out onto my porch and immediately spotted Marcus across the street, jumping up and down like he'd stepped on a beehive. His solar battery shed, already damaged from last week's surge, had apparently just exploded with a puff of black smoke. His wife stood nearby holding a fire extinguisher the size of a shoebox, looking entirely unprepared for suburban pyrotechnic. I ran over. "What happened now?" "I just tried to switch the backup inverter," Marcus gasped, fanning smoke. "And it blew. I had it tested yesterday. It was fine." "That's the third system that's failed this week," I muttered, glancing at the charred panel. "It's like something's hitting every home with non-standard power." Marcus shot me a look. "You think Karen's involved again?" "I think something bigger is happening. And either she's part of it, or she's screwing things up badly enough to look like she is. Later that evening, I sat with Riley in my study going over witness statements. Jenna had submitted hers, confirming Karen had threatened to report her to Homeland Security over a shipment of solar batteries from Canada. A man down the street named Brian admitted Karen had demanded access to his Tesla wall charger and accused him of siphoning unapproved voltage. Riley's brow furrowed as she pieced it together. "She's not just targeting you," Riley said slowly. "She's targeting anything she doesn't understand. Solar tech, artifacts, imported goods, external security devices. That's a pattern. And if we can prove it's discriminatory, this case jumps into a whole new bracket." "Discriminatory?" I asked. "Think about it. Jenna's Hispanic. Brian's Indian American. You had an international artifact. She doesn't go after the people ordering socks from Target. She goes after anyone who doesn't conform to her personal version of HOA purity." I leaned back in my chair, chilled. "So it's not just overreach. It's bias, cloaked in bylaws." "Exactly. And if we show she used her position to justify it? She's not just facing damages. She's looking at a full board recall, civil penalties, and potentially federal investigation if any protected items were destroyed." Outside, another neighbor's porch light began blinking like a strobe. I made a mental note. That was the fourth porch in 2 days to show signs of electrical hiccup. And every single one of those homes? They'd all had confrontations with Karen in the past 6 months. The next day brought something even stranger. A small, brown envelope with no return address arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a USB drive and a single-typed sentence: "She's been recording everything." I stared at it, then immediately handed it to Riley, who had it scanned and reviewed by her tech forensics guy. A few hours later, she called me, half laughing, half horrified. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "It's Karen's personal surveillance archive. She's been secretly recording every HOA meeting, public and private, and even keeping logs of suspicious residents with tags like foreign name and non-standard appearance. There are folders labeled subversive architecture and decor violations by suspect families. She's even got a slideshow titled Package Profiles. Friend or foe?" I blinked. "You're joking." "I wish I was. There's a 10-minute voice memo of her talking about how smart homes are Trojan horses for cultural decay and how she's on a mission to protect the neighborhood from unauthorized influences. It's unhinged. And this helps our case? Helps? It might win it for us." That night I couldn't sleep. My mind raced through images of the artifact, of Elena's gentle hands brushing soil off of ancient clay, of the collectors who had trusted me with something sacred. And now I was fighting a suburban tyrant who believed herself the last defender of American landscaping purity, with a vendetta against anyone who deviated from her self-appointed code of conduct. I finally drifted off sometime after 2 a.m., only to be awoken at 4:17 by the sound of blaring car alarms and the unmistakable crackle of shorting power lines. Lights danced across the walls. A transformer somewhere down the block had blown. I ran outside in pajama pants and a robe, along with a dozen other confused, half-awake neighbors. Emergency lights flashed. One man shouted that his EV charger had sparked while plugged in. Another pointed to his garage door, which had jammed mid-close and was making a high-pitched whining noise like it was possessed. Even the sprinkler systems were acting up. Mine had activated spontaneously, soaking my mailbox with a perfectly timed arc. And standing in the middle of the sidewalk, holding a flashlight like a wand, was Karen Milbrook. She wore her HOA windbreaker like it was armor and pointed at my house as soon as she saw me. "This is what happens when you allow foreign tech and unregulated devices," she yelled. "We are under attack from within." A collective groan rose from the crowd. "Karen," said Mr. Patel, who lived 2 houses down, "your Wi-Fi sprinkler exploded my hydrangeas last week." She ignored him and stormed toward me. "You need to leave this neighborhood. You've invited chaos. Outsiders with unstable devices. Karen, I said, cutting her off. You sprayed bleach on a box and blew out an electrical grid. You're not saving this place. You're breaking it. I am preserving it, she screamed. That was the moment Riley pulled up in her SUV, stepped out, and raised her phone high. Say that again, Karen. Just for the record. Karen froze. The neighborhood stared. Then, for the first time since this whole ordeal began, she hesitated. That was the first crack. The next day, the city dispatched an emergency inspection team to investigate the electrical grid issues. Their preliminary report suggested a compromised HOA electrical panel had been improperly rewired. The rewiring? Logged under Karen M., with no licensed contractor listed. And suddenly, Karen's war wasn't just ideological. It was criminal. The day the city inspector showed up with a clipboard longer than my front porch, I knew things were going downhill fast. For Karen, at least. His name was Hal, a grizzled, sun-leathered veteran of electrical code enforcement, and he looked like the kind of man who could smell faulty wiring through drywall. He knocked precisely 3 times, then held up his badge like he expected me to run. I didn't. I just pointed to the scorched utility panel near my porch and said, "Start there." Hal didn't smile. He just nodded and got to work, muttering things like, "non-compliant sealant," and code violations so obvious my grandmother could see it. Within 20 minutes, he had traced the electrical fault through the main HOA power junction behind the clubhouse, an access panel that had recently been rewired with mismatched copper leads and zip ties. And at the center of it all? A hand-scribbled sticker that read, "Approved by KM." That was Karen Milbrook's handwriting. I would have recognized those aggressive loops anywhere. Hal snapped photos, took out a notepad, and let out a long, low whistle. "This," he said, "is what we call a flaming ball of liability. I've seen backyard meth labs wired safer than this." As he filed his initial report, I texted Riley the photos. Her response was instant. "We add municipal endangerment. Discovery phase will be delicious." But the real surprise came not from city records or forensic wiring inspections, but from the HOA board itself. The board, long considered Karen's loyal lapdogs, had finally begun to fracture. The tipping point wasn't the artifact or even the transformer disaster. It was the power outage at the clubhouse that canceled the monthly wine and paint event. Apparently, when half the neighborhood's retired ladies can't sip Chardonnay while painting sunsets on dollar store canvases, revolution becomes a real possibility. One of the board members, Doug, a balding, ex-military guy who lived 4 houses down, knocked on my door that evening. He looked sheepish, holding a plastic folder and a can of root beer. "I didn't vote for any of it," he said before I could even ask. "Any of what?" "Karen's bleach protocol. The surveillance tracking. The rewiring of the clubhouse junction box. All of it. We never authorized her to make unilateral decisions like that." "You're telling me she went rogue?" He scratched the back of his neck. "Not exactly. She always claimed she was acting under emergency bylaw interpretation. Said the HOA charter gave her special authority during community threats." "Community threats like imported statues and smart sprinklers?" Doug sighed. "That's what we thought too. Until she started locking board members out of the email system. And when Brian questioned her last month, she accused him of covertly undermining HOA security objectives." I blinked. "She turned the HOA into a spy agency?" "She has a file on every homeowner, categorized by loyalty, compliance, and risk factor. You were marked red tier." I didn't even know what to say. Doug handed me the folder. Inside were internal HOA emails, meeting minutes, and most damning of all, an unsigned form with a budget allocation request $4/$8,500 labeled, Preemptive Neighborhood Threat Response Fund. Attached to it was a list of purchases: motion-activated chemical sprayers, anti-loitering sirens, and industrial bleach shipments billed under cleanliness reinforcements. Where did she even install this stuff? I asked. Check the clubhouse bushes, Doug said with a wry smile. You might find more than rabbits in there. By the time Riley arrived with her assistant that evening, we had a full case laid out in my living room. The artifact photos, the forensic analysis of the electrical surge, the HOA documents, the surveillance logs, the insane neighborhood tier list, and now municipal code violations stacked like pancake. It wasn't just a civil case anymore. It was a circus with legal fireworks. Riley circled the table slowly. Karen violated her mandate, endangered public safety, destroyed federal property, and defamed her neighbors. I'm filing for a restraining order tomorrow and beginning a recall campaign. Can you even recall her? She ran unopposed last election. If I can prove she misled the board and acted without consent, we can dissolve her presidency with a 2/3 homeowner vote. And the bleach? Riley smiled coldly. Oh, we'll make sure she remembers the bleach. At this point, even the neighbors who had stayed out of it were picking side. Brian and Jenna printed out flyers supporting the recall and slipped them into mailboxes. Marcus started a petition that gathered over 80 signatures in 2 days. Even the neighborhood kids joined in, one of them creating a TikTok with clips of Karen spraying bleach in slow motion, set to dramatic violin music. It hit 300,000 views by day 3. Karen, of course, did not go quietly. Her retaliation came in the form of a new emergency HOA code enforcement alert emailed to all residents. She accused subversive elements of tampering with community order, warned that foreign packages may contain destabilizing technology, and claimed the neighborhood was under a coordinated ideological siege. She then fined Jenna $154 visual clutter due to her solar panels and slapped Marcus with a $500 electrical hazard citation. Riley wasn't fazed. She'd already prepared the next move. An emergency injunction to halt Karen's ability to issue fines, pending the outcome of the case. And then, the kicker, Riley filed for public disclosure of Karen's HOA email account. The moment that motion was granted, we hit gold. Karen had sent dozens of internal messages to board members pushing bizarre conspiracy theories, claims that smart mailboxes were scanning brainwaves, that imported electronics were a gateway to foreign cyber influence, and that the artifact I received could summon spiritual unrest. She described herself in one email as the final firewall protecting the integrity of the suburban way of life. Doug, who had initially tried to stay neutral, showed up the next day wearing a t-shirt that read, "Firewall my foot." The day of the HOA emergency recall meeting arrived with unexpected drama. Karen showed up early, armed with a binder so large it required a wheeled suitcase. She set up a projector to show evidence that the neighborhood was being infiltrated. What played instead, because someone had swapped her USB, was the bleach-spraying footage set to circus music. The room burst into laughter. One board member accidentally spit coffee on her clipboard. Karen screamed. Actually screamed. She stormed to the front, yanked the plug from the projector, and shouted that she was being framed. But it was too late. The room had turned. The vote to remove her passed 91-4. She was officially stripped of her title, pending the results of the civil and criminal proceedings. I stood in the back, watching the woman who had tried to bleach me into submission pack up her suitcase and trudge out of the building like a disgraced soap opera villain. I half expected thunder to crash outside, but all we got was a gentle suburban breeze and the soft whir of a perfectly functional smart lawn mower trimming the clubhouse hedges. For the first time in weeks, the neighborhood felt still again. But the real trial, both legal and moral, was still ahead. And I knew Karen wasn't done just yet. 2 months later, the courtroom was packed. Not just with legal teams and the usual quiet-staring stenographer, but with neighbors, local news crews, and even a few amateur podcasters hoping to catch audio of Karen's meltdown. The judge, a stern woman with icy gray hair and an eyebrow that could cut glass, called the court to order, and every seat went still. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Riley, who looked calm, professional, and just the tiniest bit hungry for blood. Karen sat opposite us, flanked by two lawyers who looked like they were regretting ever taking the case. She wore a stiff navy blazer, heels that clicked with too much confidence, and an expression that screamed wrongfully accused suburban martyr. Her clipboard, mercifully, had not made the trip. The prosecution opened with the facts. A priceless Etruscan artifact shipped under international loan, insured and sealed, delivered safely to my porch. Video footage showed Karen Milbrook, HOA president, spraying it with bleach under the false belief that it was contraband. The bleach caused chemical damage that led to a massive power surge through my front delivery port, which tied into the HOA's shared monitoring system, resulting in multiple electrical faults across the neighborhood and property damage that ran into the tens of thousands. Riley didn't even flinch as she dropped the bombshell. Karen's unauthorized rewiring of the HOA power box, complete with KM stickers and homemade fuses made from twist ties. The jury gasped. Karen fidgeted. Then came the emails. Riley handed the court a bound file of Karen's own messages. Her tirades about suspicious residents, fears about electromagnetic brainwaves, her vendetta against anything she didn't understand. And then the folders she kept, lists of families marked as non-conforming, possibly ideological, or uncooperative. The courtroom went silent as Riley read one email aloud. If the HOA board won't step up, then I will. These homes are my battlefield. Karen's lawyer objected, of course, claiming the emails were misinterpreted and the recordings were taken out of context. The judge raised an eyebrow and said flatly, "The context is that she wrote them." Karen finally took the stand on day 3. She was theatrical, hand on heart, tear-welling eyes, describing how she acted out of a sense of duty. "I believed the package was dangerous," she insisted. "The world is not what it used to be. It's full of trickery, foreign labels, high-tech threats. I was simply trying to protect my community from harm." Riley stood and walked calmly to the evidence screen. She played the security footage again. Karen, rubber gloves on, soaking the box while humming to herself. Riley turned and said, "What part of Homeland Security protocol includes humming show tunes while bleaching antique crates, Ms. Milbrook?" The courtroom chuckled. The judge didn't stop them. Karen's performance crumbled fast. Under cross-examination, she admitted she never opened the package, never contacted authorities, and never consulted the HOA board. Her reasoning? "I knew what I saw. And I know what doesn't belong." That was the nail in her own coffin. The judge took a full hour to deliberate after closing argument. When she returned, she read the decision without hesitation. Karen was found personally liable for the destruction of international property, malicious negligence, HOA bylaw abuse, and neighborhood defamation. She was ordered to pay $2.3 million in damages to the artifact's owner, plus $250,000 in punitive damages to me. The HOA was also fined and placed under independent financial oversight for 6 months. And Karen? She was banned from ever holding any future HOA-related office, anywhere in the state. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I gave a short statement, just enough to thank the jury and emphasize the importance of protecting community, not policing it. Riley, ever the professional, ducked out before the cameras hit her, but not before flashing me a triumphant grin. Back in Whispering Pines, the neighborhood was already transforming. Karen's old office had been converted into a communal co-working space. A new HOA board was elected, this time by actual vote. The loyalty tier files were deleted, the fines rolled back, and best of all, Jenna's solar panels were now featured in the monthly newsletter as a model of eco-forward design. Marcus threw a neighborhood cookout where someone dressed as an ancient statue and reenacted the bleach attack with a super soaker. The kids voted it the best event of the year. As for Karen, her house went up for sale a week after the verdict. The "For Sale" sign didn't even make it to sunrise before someone covered it in neon pink stickers that read, "Unapproved Structure" and "Bleach-Free Zone." She tried to sneak out early one morning, but a group of neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, silent, just watching as her SUV pulled away. No jeers. No applause. Just the cool, satisfying silence of a power-drunk tyrant finally dethroned. I got a new delivery a month later. This one was hand-carried by a courier wearing gloves, with security tags and a carbon-sealed container. Inside was a note from the Italian collector. "Thank you for your efforts in recovering justice. Please accept this, an authenticated bronze coin from the same dig site." It wasn't worth millions, but it meant the world. That coin now sits in a glass case above my desk. Not because it's valuable, but because it survived. Because I survived. And because every time I look at it, I remember that sometimes the worst villains don't wear masks or carry weapons. Sometimes they hold clipboards and believe the world is better when they control every inch of it. Now, when neighbors wave at me, they're not just being polite, they're grateful. Jenna brings fresh eggs from her backyard coop. Marcus and I built a community tool shed where Karen's infamous, unauthorized structures once stood. We even voted to start a weekend art market on the clubhouse lawn, where kids sell crafts and local musicians play acoustic covers of 80s songs. I'd never realized how alive this neighborhood could feel until the shadow of control was lifted. But there was one last twist. 2 weeks after the dust settled, I received a call from the local power authority. They were conducting a follow-up inspection of the HOA's electrical grid and had found something odd: a small relay box hidden inside one of the decorative light poles, wired into a secondary feed line. Whoever installed it had done so without permits and used non-standard voltage converters. It was dated back nearly a year. And the permit request? Signed by Karen Milbrook. Apparently, she had wired up a personal override system to control the power feed to select homes, likely those in her red tier threat list. The system had been frying itself slowly for months and had nearly gone unnoticed. The inspector called it a ticking voltage time bomb. That was the final mystery unraveled. Karen hadn't just wrecked a historic artifact and triggered a civil lawsuit. She'd nearly caused an electrical fire that could have taken out the whole block. When the city pressed charges for unauthorized electrical modification, she pled no contest. She now lives in a rental 30 miles away, banned from serving on any board or wiring anything stronger than a string of fairy lights. As for me, I kept the footage, the artifact, the coin, and the lesson. Sometimes justice comes in a courtroom. Sometimes it comes with paperwork. But every once in a while, every rare and glorious once in a while, justice smells like bleach and leaves a Karen-shaped hole in a very expensive fence.